Welcome to this WSO Level 0 officiating course. This foundation level course offers a basic overview and introduction to the rules of squash and is aimed at anyone wishing to have an entry-level understanding when participating in the game. It's about learning to play safely, it's about being able to referee your own match and to supervise squash in a basic capacity. Once you've worked through the content included over the next few pages, you'll be able to complete a basic rules test online just to check your level of knowledge and understanding.
So the aim of this Level 0 course is to introduce you to the game of squash so that you can play it safely and play it fairly while supervising your own matches. Now, to be able to do that, there's a few things you're going to have to get to know and understand, and we're going to cover that in this course, and there's actually quite a bit of information. It's going to be around the aim of the rules, the court, so the different lines involved, the actual game itself and how you score it, the warm-up, the etiquette involved and the timings for the warm-up and the intervals, how to serve, and then how to play the game and how rallies are actually structured, and then last but not least, looking at the major decisions that you'll have to deal with and that you will inevitably get when you're playing a game of squash. And then once you've done that, you'll be able to move on and complete the basic online test to just check your understanding.
It's really important that you know and understand the rules. You'll be able to find a link on the WSO website, so it's a very strong recommendation that you familiarize yourself with the rules by reading them.
There are two main goals that we need to consider when we're thinking about the rules, and they are player safety, so that each rally can be played without any kind of problem, and then fair play, so making sure that players play honestly and also that the fair outcome of every rally is achieved. It's really important that you become familiar with the different lines that you get on a squash court and the roles that they play as well. Now, the other thing to remember is that unlike tennis, if a ball hits the line, it's actually called out. So always bear that in mind when you're playing. Now, the diagram in front of you has got all the different lines listed, and if you're interested, it's also got the dimensions. But at the front of the court, you've got the front wall outline, so the line right at the top is the outline. So you've got the side wall line, the front wall line, and the back wall line. So they're all the out of court lines basically. You've got the service line in the middle of the front wall, so anytime you serve you have to get the ball over that line and within the front wall line. And then you've also got the tin at the front, so you always have to get the ball up above the tin, which counts when you're playing drop shots. Now the service box area is important because you need to have 1 foot in the serve when you're serving, so it becomes relevant then. And then of course you've got the half court line and the short line, and what they do is they make up the back quarters, and you'll see when we talk about the serve that you have to land the ball into those areas depending which side you're serving from. The game of squash usually features 2 players. Now there are some situations where you can have 4 players on the court, and this is called doubles, but for this Level 0 course we're going to concentrate on playing with 2 players. Now it starts with a serve and then you alternate shots until the rally ends. Play has to be as continuous as possible in the situation, so you're always looking to try and keep things going. Now in terms of scoring, the official scoring now is point to rally, which is every time you win a rally you win a point, and the games are scored up to 11 points. Now the only time it's not played up to 11 points is when you reach 10-all, which is known as a tie-break situation, and then one player has to lead by 2 points to be able to win the game. You usually play best of 5 games, so the first player to get to 3 games, so you could win 3-love, 3-1 or 3-2, but there are occasions where you may have to play to the best of 3, in which case it's about the player reaching 2 games first. Now, the alternate scoring system that you might come across once in a while, which is known as English scoring or traditional scoring, you only actually score a point when you're the server and games are played up to 9 points. And the only time it's not played up to 9 is when it's 8-all, and then the person that got to 8 first, so that the receiver will choose whether play continues to 9 or 10. So that is another variation on the scoring that you'll need to know. At the start of a match, when both players first step onto the court, what you'll do is you'll look to complete a warm-up. Now the warm-up is about warming up the ball and warming up yourself as well, and it's a maximum of 4 minutes. Now after 2 minutes you switch sides so that both players get to have a hit on both sides of the court. Now it's important that both players get equal opportunities to strike the ball, and general etiquette would be to hit the ball maybe 2-3 times at the most, and then hit the ball back across to your opponent for them to be able to hit 2 or 3 shots before passing the ball across to you. So that's generally the etiquette. Now after the warm-up is completed, after the 4 minutes in total, quite often you'll look to spin the racket, and one player will call left or right or up or down, and that determines which player is going to get to serve first. Now the other thing to think about and to know is that you can get intervals between games where you can go off and get a drink. Now they are usually 90 seconds according to the rules, but it can also vary depending on where and what you're playing, if it's a tournament. But for now, we'll stick to the rules and we'll go for 90 seconds. Okay, so let's look at the serve in more detail. It's important to remember at the end of the warm-up, when you spun the racket, it's the player who wins that spin of racket who serves first. And then at the beginning of each game and after each change of server, it's the server who chooses which service box they wish to serve from. Now while you retain the serve, so if you're winning consecutive points, the server has to serve from alternating service boxes. If a rally ends in a lead, the server has to serve again from the same box as they just served from. Now there might be times where you're not sure which side to serve from. So if you're officiating your own match, you and your opponent have to decide which the best service box option is, or where you think it was from. Now if you were playing an official match, you may have a referee and a marker who would tell you the correct service box to serve from. But in an instance where it's just you and an opponent refereeing yourself, you have to come up with an agreement. Now a serve is considered good with a few different considerations. Now it's when the server drops or throws the ball from the hand or the racket and strikes it on a first or further attempt before it touches anything else. And at the same time that you strike the ball as a server, one foot has to be in contact with the floor inside the service box, but the foot is not allowed to touch any part of the line or the boundary of that box. Now the ball has to be struck directly to the front wall. It's not allowed to hit the side wall and the front wall at the same time. And you have to serve it above the service line and underneath the outline, and making sure that it doesn't hit the lines again. So the ball, unless volleyed by the receiver, has to bounce for the first time in the opposite quarter at the back of the court. And that's without touching the line that marks out that quarter.
3-2.
So if a serve doesn't count and doesn't match what I've just described, then it's considered a fault, and it's actually the receiver who wins the rally. Now if the server actually drops or throws the ball and doesn't strike the ball, this isn't counted as a serve, so you then get another go to serve again. A let is also allowed if the receiver's not ready to return serve, or doesn't actually attempt to return the serve. But if you as the server serve a fault, then you actually lose the rally even if the opponent wasn't ready to receive it. So if the server serves from the wrong service box and the server wins the rally, and you've played the rally out before realizing, the server actually wins the rally, and then you swap sides like you would have done before.
3-2.
Now it's important that you don't look to serve until the score has been called out by either you or your opponent, or the referee or marker if you actually have one. So that's just the etiquette of making sure that everyone's ready. Let's have a look at the play. Now, play continues after a good serve, and it carries on as long as each return is good, or until a player actually requests a let or makes an appeal. Now, to make a good return, you have to make sure that you've struck the ball correctly before it's bounced twice on the floor. And you have to do it without hitting either player or their clothing or racket. Now, it has to hit the front wall either directly or after hitting any of the other walls, so back wall or side wall. And it has to hit above the tin and below the outline without having first bounced on the floor before it hits that front wall. Now, when it rebounds from the front wall, it's important that it does so without touching the tin and is not out, so it's underneath the outline. As long as you've done that, you've made a good return and you can keep alternating shots.
Right, okay, so that seems like it'll be really good for Joel King. Good omens.
Yeah, no. Kevin. I think it's an incredible opportunity for Joelle King to really, like, she's accelerated the progress mentally against the lower rank, you know, the 14, Salma Hani is 14 in the world, and now she's jumping from the
out. 5-1.
When playing squash, we need to make sure that we can enforce the rules. Now, there's two types of officials, or two main types of officials that you'll come across initially when you're playing squash, and that's the marker and the referee. Now, you only meet those when you're playing competitive matches. So for this course, we're going to assume that you're going to be playing and it's going to be yourself and your opponent that are going to have to enforce the rules. Now, when you're refereeing your own game, there's a few things that you need to consider, and that is keeping the score. If you had a referee, the order that they would call it is they would call the decision first, then the score, and then give any situation if they need to. So for the example there, it's yes let, 10-2 game ball. Now, another situation might be that they would tell you which side you have to serve from. So it might be yes let, 5-4 from the right. Now, one thing that you need to know when you're refereeing your own match is that the score that's called first is always the server's score, and it's a good way of being able to tell which player has got what. So always remember that. Now, there's a few other calls that you need to remember as well, and they are not up, which is basically when the ball has bounced twice, so that's called a double bounce, or if there's any other kind of incorrect return, which might be a double hit or a carry. Then you've also got down, and down is when the ball hits the tin or the floor before it actually hits the front wall. Out is all lines that are out in a situation. So all lines are out. So the wall above the line, the ceiling, through the fitting, anything like that. So if it goes over a beam or through lights, that would be considered out. And then the last one there is fault. So all service faults are called fault, which is down, out, a fault where it hits the service line or below or into the tin, a foot fault, which is also when your foot might hit the service box line or be out of the service box when you serve, and then of course if it was not up as well, as I mentioned, if it hits the tin. So there's a few things for you to remember there. And then the other thing that you'll encounter is interference. Now, if there's interference, you're going to have to decide on a yes let, a no let, or a stroke. There will be instances where neither you or your opponent will be able to agree on a decision or what's just happened. Now, in those instances, you're better off playing a let rather than actually arguing out the case. Over the next few slides is a collection of videos that goes into slightly more detail.
Refereeing your own match is a problem and a conundrum that pretty much any squash player playing in leagues comes across, or even when you're just playing friendlies. So you're on court, there's no one outside watching, it's literally just about you and your opponent trying to work out what the correct decision is. And it does become difficult, and it can be very heated on there, especially when you've got two players charging around and you've got your adrenaline flowing. Now, I think it's important to remember that we want a fair outcome for the decision. We want to be able to enjoy the game, and we want a fair outcome for the entire match. So it's always worth remembering that. But I think in any given situation, whether it's extreme in terms of a player thinking it's a no-let or a stroke, or even if it's just a difference of opinion, if you can see it's viable and it's quite close, and you know, it's the difference between a no-let and a yes-let, or a stroke and a yes-let. I think the middle ground is the best place to sit, and if you really can't agree or you can't see each other's perspective, then the fair outcome really is just to play a yes-let and maybe discuss it afterwards, because otherwise you're just going to be stuck in a debate for quite a long time. So the easy fix for any sort of disagreement on a court is to play a let. And I think that is also included with out-of-court line calls or ting calls, or even pickups with double bounces or carries. I think any kind of doubt, it's just you two. I think the fair outcome is probably more often than not to play a yes-let.
When you're playing the game of squash, you're going to encounter decisions that are associated with the game, and they are called lets, no-lets, and strokes. Now, the reason for this is that, of course, you're playing on a court in a close proximity to each other. So just wanted to give you a really quick and brief introduction of what each one of those is. Now, a let is when you get the result of a rally where a player has stopped and requested a let, but neither player wins the point, and the player who served previously will serve again. Now, reasons for a let will include interference where both players were doing what was required of them, and the incoming player, so the striker, would have been able to make a good return. There's also lets given if there's any kind of concern around safety or if it's dangerous. If the player went the wrong way, so they were wrong-footed, but then were able to recover and make a good return, that would be an example of being able to get a yes-let. If a player was going to swing and the swing was just affected by the opponent's position, and they couldn't quite play the ball properly, that would also be a let. Another example would be that the ball hits a player on the way to the side wall before going up and being a good return onto the front wall, would also be a let situation. Now, there could also be other examples if there's a distraction caused by an opponent, or when a player turns, that would generally be a let ball. If the player turns and it's the swing, that would be slightly different, but generally when a player turns, it would be a let. And basically any time that a situation is uncertain, so whether you're not sure if an opponent would have got a ball or not, if there's things that were close, if a ball was maybe up or down, those are times when you would repeat the rally, you'd play a let, and it's the fair outcome. Now, looking at a no-let, it's basically the result of a rally when a player's requested a let, but it's decided that they're going to lose the point because the request wasn't valid or justified. Now, the reasons for a no-let could be that there wasn't any interference or any fear of injury, so safety wasn't involved. Also, if the player wouldn't have been able to make a good return, so the other player, the opponent, had hit a winning shot, for example. If the player, so the striker going to the ball, actually encountered the interference but then went past it and carried on to try and play the ball, that would be a no-let situation because they accepted that interference. Also, if there was interference but it was only slight and it wasn't enough to knock the player off or to interfere enough, then that's called minimal interference, and that would also be a no-let situation. Another situation is if the player doesn't actually make enough effort to go to and play the ball. So if there wasn't that effort, then you'd award a no-let in that situation. Also, if there was a wave through, so if there was direct access to a ball, but the player instead chose to not take that and go towards the player and went the wrong way, that could be a situation where you would give a no-let as well. And then any time that an opponent is trying to cause interference, so for example making a swing bigger than it normally would be, that would be a situation where you would award a no-let. And also if a player turns on a ball and there was no need to turn and they could have hit it on the other side, that's another situation where you would award a no-let. And then the last example that I want to give is if the ball would have hit the opponent or did hit the opponent but it wasn't going to be good, so it wasn't going to make it to the front wall, for example, that would be a no-let situation. Now the last decision that you'll encounter is a stroke, and basically the stroke is when a player has requested a let but receives the point and is given the point because the situation was considered to have been caused by the opponent's action or lack of action. So the opponent caused it, and I'll give you a few examples of it, but basically the reason for a stroke includes a lack of effort by an opponent to clear. So if they've played a shot and they've just stood there, that would be an example of a stroke. Also, if the player would have hit a winning return, that would be a stroke situation. If the striker, so the player that's about to hit the ball, has their swing completely prevented, then that is a stroke situation. And then also if the ball hits the opponent on the way to the front wall, it's unfortunate, but that would be a situation where a stroke is awarded. So those are the three decisions that you'll come across, though there's obviously a few other situations where decisions may be awarded that would involve that as well, but I think those are the basics you need to know. It can be very complex, it can be complicated, but hopefully that gives you all the information.
Yes, sir.
Yes, let 6 all. Yes, let 2 love.
No let. You were through. You need to play the ball. Oh my God, that's really bad. 9-5.
No let. Score 5.
Novak. 6-3.
Feathers the ball in.
Stroke difficulties. 3-all.
Stroke to Cole. 5-2. Stroke to Adele. 3-1.
Well done, you've worked your way through this Level 0 course. Hopefully you've fully understood all the content, but if there's anything you're unsure about, you can always re-watch it and revisit it. And also just take the time to read through any of the supporting material linked to the content that's being covered. And then once you are happy that you've fully understood it and you're completely comfortable with all the information, it's time for you to take that short online test just to check and challenge your understanding.